The lost cowboy. He spent a night at the home of three Apache widows. Wild West tale. Thomas Harper, a rugged cowboy in his late 20s, rode slowly along the narrow, dusty trail, feeling the sharp wind cut across his face. His horse, a sturdy bay named Shadow, plodded along steadily, but even the loyal animal showed signs of exhaustion. Tom had been traveling all day under the blazing sun, searching for a cattle trail that had gone cold. Every ridge and rocky outcrop looked the same in the harsh light, and the desert seemed to stretch on forever, endless and unwelcoming. He wiped the sweat from his forehead with a worn handkerchief and scanned the horizon. There was nothing but sand, scrubby bushes, and distant mountains that looked almost black in the evening light. The trail he had been following had vanished hours ago, leaving him to navigate by instinct and memory. He knew he was lost. There was no denying it. The sun would set completely soon, and the desert nights were cold and dangerous. Tom had faced challenges before, from stampedes to encounters with wild animals, but there was something about the desert at night that made the hairs on his neck stand on end. The silence was thick, almost tangible, and the wind seemed to whisper warnings he could not ignore. He adjusted his wide-brimmed hat against the wind and guided Shadow toward a small rise that offered a better view. For a long moment, he scanned the land, letting his eyes sweep over the sand and scattered rocks. Then, just as he was about to lose hope, he noticed a thin column of smoke rising in the distance. It was faint and wavering but unmistakable. Tom's heart quickened. Smoke in this part of the desert meant life. People had made a fire, a signal of shelter, warmth, or company. He leaned forward in his saddle, squinting to get a better look. Could it be a camp? Perhaps another traveler like himself, seeking refuge from the night. He didn't know, but he had no choice but to try. He nudged Shadow forward, careful not to make a sudden movement that might startle the horse. Every step brought him closer to the faint smoke, and the hope of finding help pushed him to keep moving, even as fatigue gnawed at his muscles. As he rode, memories of past adventures filled his mind. He thought of dusty towns where he had slept under a roof, safe from the wind and sand. He remembered the cattle drives, long hours on horseback, the smell of leather, sweat, and dust mixing in the air. He had been a wanderer for as long as he could remember, traveling from town to town, trail to trail. The freedom had always appealed to him, but tonight, in the vast emptiness, it felt lonely. The desert made him realize just how small he was in the grand scheme of things. The sky grew darker, and the first stars began to peek through the deepening purple. The temperature dropped quickly, and Tom wrapped his coat tighter around his shoulders. Shadow snorted, lifting a hoof and stamping to shake off the chill. They moved cautiously, the cowboy alert to every sound. Even the wind seemed alive, rustling through the sparse desert bushes, making shadows that looked like strange figures moving in the twilight. Finally, after what felt like hours but was likely only an hour or so, Tom reached the base of a small rise. From this vantage point, he could see more clearly. The smoke came from a modest adobe structure nestled in a small clearing. The house was simple, made of sun-baked clay bricks and a low roof, with smoke curling gently from a chimney. There were signs of life, small footprints in the dust, and the faint outline of movement near the entrance. Tom slowed Shadow to a careful walk, unsure of what awaited him. He had learned long ago that strangers could be dangerous, and he approached with caution. At the same time, relief mixed with curiosity. He was not completely alone in the desert tonight, and that thought gave him courage. As he drew closer, he could see three women outside the house. They were older but strong and purposeful, moving with a quiet grace. Their hair was dark, with streaks of silver, and their eyes were sharp, observing everything around them. Each carried a sense of history in the lines of her face, as if she had lived through hardships that Tom could only imagine. He realized almost immediately that these were no ordinary women. There was a dignity in their posture, a strength that spoke of survival against all odds. Tom's heart pounded. He dismounted slowly, patting Shadow's neck to calm him. The horse stepped cautiously, snorting and pawing at the ground. Tom cleared his throat, not wanting to startle anyone. "Even in," he called out softly, keeping his voice calm and steady. "My name's Thomas Harper. I've lost my way out here, thought I might find some shelter." The women paused in their tasks, glancing at each other. Their eyes, sharp and assessing, turned toward him. There was no immediate welcome, no friendly wave. Instead, there was caution, a quiet tension hanging in the desert air. Tom knew better than to step forward without permission. He raised his hand slightly, showing he meant no harm, and waited. After a tense moment, the eldest of the three, a woman with silver-streaked hair pulled back into a tight braid, stepped forward. Her eyes, dark and steady, studied Tom from head to toe. Finally, she spoke in a calm, deliberate tone. "You're far from the trails. What brings you here at this hour?" Tom tipped his hat politely. "I've been out riding all day and lost my way. I saw your smoke and hoped maybe you could offer some water or a place to rest." He tried to sound confident, but his voice betrayed the fatigue and worry he felt. The woman said nothing for a moment, then motioned for him to stay where he was. She exchanged a few words with the other two women, who nodded in agreement. It was clear that some unspoken understanding passed between them. Finally, she spoke again. "You may come closer, but know this: trust is earned here, not given freely." Tom felt a surge of gratitude. He led Shadow closer, tying the reins to a post near the house. The horse seemed to sense the change in tension and stood quietly, ears flicking toward the women. Tom stepped up to the small adobe porch, careful to respect the boundaries of the strangers who had shown him a lifeline in the vast desert. The woman offered him a simple cup of water, and Tom drank gratefully, the cold liquid soothing his parched throat. He could feel his body relaxing slightly, the tension of the long ride easing with each sip. The women watched him quietly, their expressions unreadable, yet not unkind. Tom realized that this was not just a place of shelter, it was a sanctuary, a home built by resilience and survival, and he was being allowed into it, even for a short while. As darkness fell completely, the desert around them transformed. The stars glittered in the sky, and the moon cast a silver glow over the adobe home. The wind rustled through the sparse bushes, and the quiet was broken only by the occasional call of a night bird or the distant howl of a coyote. Tom felt both the loneliness of the desert and the warmth of human presence. He knew that the night ahead would be long, but for the first time since losing his way, he felt hope. The three women prepared a simple meal of beans and dried meat over a small fire. Tom watched, feeling the rhythm of their movements and the care they took in each task. There was an artistry to their simplicity, a demonstration of skill and experience that made even the smallest actions seem significant. He offered to help, but the eldest shook her head. "Rest," she said simply. "You'll need your strength." Tom obeyed, settling near the fire as the warmth spread through him. The smell of smoke and cooking meat filled the air, blending with the earthy scent of the desert. He felt the day's fatigue settle in, and he allowed himself to relax, though he remained alert. There was something in the quiet strength of the women that demanded respect, and he could feel the weight of their history and experience pressing lightly upon him. Hours passed as they moved quietly about their tasks, preparing for the night. Tom watched the flames dance in the fire, reflecting in his tired eyes. He thought of the cattle trails, the towns, and the endless deserts he had crossed before, but tonight felt different. Tonight he was not just wandering aimlessly. He had found a place of human connection, even if temporary. He realized that the desert, for all its danger and isolation, could also bring unexpected encounters, lessons, and kindness. As the night deepened, the wind died down, leaving only the soft crackle of the fire and the distant whisper of the desert. Tom felt the exhaustion from the day wash over him, his eyelids growing heavy. Yet beneath the fatigue, there was a sense of anticipation, a feeling that this night, spent in the home of three resilient women, would leave an imprint on his life. He lay back on a blanket near the fire, looking up at the stars. The desert stretched endlessly above him, a vast canvas of light and darkness. And though he was far from the familiar trails and towns, he felt a quiet reassurance. The night would be long and challenging, but he was no longer completely alone. There was warmth, safety, and human presence within the adobe walls, and that was enough to give him courage for what the darkness might bring. Tom drifted into a light sleep, the fire's warmth comforting him as the desert night continued around them. He had entered this place as a lost traveler, uncertain and wary. But as the stars shone above and the soft glow of the fire illuminated the adobe home, he began to understand that even in the harshest of landscapes, kindness, resilience, and humanity could be found in unexpected ways. The night was just beginning, and Tom's journey had already taken an unforgettable turn. Tom awoke to the soft glow of the fire, the first light of dawn brushing the edges of the desert sky. The air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of sagebrush and the lingering warmth from the adobe walls. He sat up slowly, stretching his stiff muscles from the long ride and the cold night. Shadow, his faithful horse, nickered softly from where he had been tied outside. Tom smiled, reaching out to scratch the horse's neck. Despite the fatigue and the uncertainty of the past day, there was a sense of calm in the morning, a quiet promise that the day might bring more clarity and direction. The three women were already awake, moving with purpose around the small courtyard. One was stirring a small pot over the fire, the smell of cooking beans mixing with the crisp morning air. Another was gathering firewood, careful to keep it dry despite the slight dew that had settled overnight. The eldest, the woman who had first allowed Tom to approach the home, carried water from a nearby small well, her movements deliberate and practiced. Every action seemed to flow naturally, as if the tasks had been repeated countless times over decades. Tom watched quietly, not wanting to intrude. He felt a strange combination of curiosity and respect. These women had endured hardships that he could barely imagine: loss, isolation, and the relentless challenges of desert life. And yet, there was a resilience in their movements, a quiet dignity that demanded acknowledgement. He realized that the small adobe home was not just a shelter. It was a testament to survival, to ingenuity, and to the strength of human spirit in the face of adversity. When the eldest woman finally noticed him watching, she offered a small, approving nod. "You'll need food before you continue," she said simply. Her voice was calm, steady, with an undertone of authority that made Tom feel both welcomed and cautious. He nodded in gratitude, moving closer to the fire as the smell of the morning meal grew stronger. As they ate together, a rhythm of quiet conversation developed. Tom spoke of his journey, carefully leaving out details that might seem boastful or careless. He mentioned the lost cattle trail, the long hours under the sun, and the endless miles of desert that had brought him to their home. The women listened attentively, their expressions calm and inscrutable. Occasionally, one would nod or ask a brief question, testing his intentions, his honesty, and his demeanor. The middle woman, whose hair was tied back with a simple cloth, asked, "You travel alone in these lands often?" Her voice was steady, and her eyes, dark and observant, seemed to measure his every gesture. Tom nodded. "Yes, most days I ride alone. It's not always easy, but it's the life I've chosen. There's freedom in it, and danger too." He smiled faintly, though the memory of yesterday's lost trail reminded him that danger was never far. The women exchanged subtle glances, then returned their attention to their tasks. There was a quiet understanding forming between them and Tom, a cautious bridge of trust, built slowly with words, gestures, and observation. He felt a strange mixture of humility and relief. In the vast desert, encounters with strangers could be risky. Yet here in this home, he sensed a willingness to extend hospitality, a silent offer of safety in a world that often lacked it. After the meal, the eldest woman approached him with a small, woven basket containing simple items for the journey: dried fruit, a piece of jerky, and a flask of water. "Keep these with you," she said. "The desert is not forgiving. You will need strength and caution." Her eyes met his, and Tom felt a depth of understanding there, an acknowledgement of the dangers he had already faced and those that might lie ahead. He took the basket with gratitude, the weight of its contents lighter than the weight of the trust she had placed in him. The youngest of the three women, who moved with a quiet grace despite her age, gestured toward the small adobe courtyard. "We will show you a place to rest your horse and prepare for the next part of your journey," she said. Her voice was soft but firm, and there was a kindness in her eyes that made Tom feel both welcome and cautious. He followed her, leading Shadow to a shaded area where fresh water had been placed. The horse drank eagerly, and Tom cleaned and brushed him, feeling the bond between rider and animal strengthen with each careful motion. As the morning progressed, the women invited Tom to sit with them under the small shade of the adobe walls. They began to share stories of their lives, not in a way that seemed forced or dramatic, but simply as a matter of fact. They spoke of the husbands they had lost, of the harsh winters that had tested their endurance, of the times when food was scarce, and of the small triumphs that kept them moving forward. Tom listened intently, captivated by the strength and resilience in their words. Each story was filled with wisdom, lessons learned from experience, and an unspoken pride in their ability to survive and care for one another. He realized that these women had built their lives around resourcefulness, patience, and mutual support, qualities that often went unnoticed by travelers like him, who moved quickly from one place to another. One of the women described how she had learned to identify hidden sources of water in the desert, how to track the movements of animals, and how to protect herself and her family from unexpected dangers. She spoke with a quiet authority that made Tom feel both humbled and inspired. "The desert gives and it takes," she said. "Respect it and it may keep you alive. Ignore it and it will teach you lessons you do not want to learn." Tom nodded, absorbing her words. He realized that his life on the trail, though adventurous, often lacked the depth of understanding and respect that these women had cultivated. He had been a wanderer, moving through the land with little attention to its rhythms or to the lives of those who had called it home for generations. This encounter was changing him already, teaching him patience, observation, and the importance of human connection. The conversation turned to lighter topics as well. The women laughed softly at small anecdotes, shared memories of past neighbors, and described the customs and traditions that had been passed down through their families. Tom smiled, feeling a warmth in the morning air that had nothing to do with the fire. He realized that even in the midst of hardship, joy and community persisted. Life, he saw, could endure and flourish in the most unlikely places. After some time, one of the women invited Tom to step outside the adobe walls to see a small garden they had cultivated. It was modest, with rows of hardy desert plants, herbs, and a few vegetables. Tom was impressed by the careful attention given to each plant, the knowledge of the land that had guided its placement and care. "Everything we grow has purpose," she explained. "The desert does not waste, neither do we." Tom walked slowly among the plants, touching the leaves and smelling the herbs. He was struck by how much care and understanding went into this small patch of life, a stark contrast to the barren desert that stretched beyond the adobe walls. It was a reminder that even in the harshest conditions, life could be nurtured, protected, and respected. The day wore on, and Tom helped in small ways, carrying water, gathering firewood, and observing the women's routines. Each task was simple, yet each revealed a depth of knowledge and resilience. He realized that the women had lived their entire lives in harmony with the desert, learning from its patterns, respecting its dangers, and finding ways to thrive where others might fail. As the sun climbed higher, the desert heat began to intensify. Tom felt the sweat on his brow and the dryness in his throat, yet he remained engaged, eager to learn as much as he could. The women spoke little of themselves in personal terms, but through their actions and teachings, Tom understood the essence of their lives: survival, care, and respect for the land and one another. By midday, the women offered him a small meal to sustain him for the journey ahead. They had prepared simple bread, dried fruits, and water, all carried with care and thoughtfulness. Tom ate with gratitude, feeling nourished not just by the food but by the presence and generosity of these strangers who had welcomed him into their home. Before he could speak, the eldest woman handed him a small bundle wrapped in cloth. Inside were essentials for the trail: a piece of cured meat, a small flask of water, and a hand-woven blanket. "The desert is unforgiving," she said. "Carry these with care and they will serve you well." Tom took the bundle, feeling the weight not only of its contents but of the trust and concern behind it. As the afternoon approached, Tom prepared to leave. Shadow had been rested and fed, and the sun was beginning its slow descent toward the horizon. The women watched quietly as he saddled his horse, their eyes calm yet full of unspoken messages. He tipped his hat respectfully, feeling a deep sense of gratitude and connection. "Thank you," he said simply. "I will not forget your kindness." The eldest woman nodded. "Travel carefully," she replied. "Respect the land, respect its people, and it may guide you safely." Her words carried a weight that Tom understood immediately, a wisdom born of years of experience in a harsh and unforgiving environment. With a final glance at the adobe home and the resilient women who had taken him in, Tom urged Shadow forward. The horse stepped carefully over the uneven ground, and together they moved toward the distant horizon, carrying with them not just supplies for survival, but lessons in patience, respect, and the quiet power of human kindness. As they rode, Tom reflected on the past day and the experiences he had gained. The desert was no longer just a place of danger and isolation. It had become a place of learning, connection, and profound understanding. The memory of the adobe home, the women, and their stories would remain with him, shaping the way he approached the trails, the people he met, and the challenges that lay ahead. The desert stretched endlessly before him, but Tom felt a renewed sense of purpose and awareness. He had discovered that even in the most remote and challenging places, humanity could thrive, teach, and offer hope. The lessons of the morning would guide him through the journey to come, reminding him that survival was not just about skill, but about understanding, respect, and connection. The sun climbed higher, casting long shadows across the sand. Tom rode with careful determination, Shadow's hooves kicking up dust as they followed an uncertain trail. In the back of his mind, he carried the warmth of the adobe home, the wisdom of the women, and the quiet strength that came from witnessing lives lived with resilience and grace. The desert was vast, but he no longer felt small in its presence. He felt part of a larger story, a witness to human endurance, and a traveler carrying lessons that would last a lifetime. The day passed slowly, and the desert heat began to soften as the afternoon sun started its slow descent toward the horizon. Tom had spent the morning learning, observing, and quietly helping the three women, but now the air carried a coolness that hinted at the approaching evening. The wind whispered softly across the dunes, rustling the leaves of the sparse desert shrubs and carrying with it the faint scent of sage and dry earth. Tom knew that the night would bring a sharp drop in temperature, but there was comfort in the presence of the adobe home and the women who had welcomed him. As the sun dipped lower, the eldest woman called Tom over to the small fire pit where a few embers from the morning still glowed. "Come sit," she said, her voice calm and deliberate. "It is time to share stories." Tom obeyed, moving closer to the circle formed by the women. The middle woman handed him a small piece of bread, and the youngest offered him a cup of water. They all settled quietly, the silence between them filled with anticipation and respect. The eldest woman began first. Her voice was low, steady, and full of experience. She spoke of her husband, a brave man who had been lost in a skirmish years ago. Her words were not filled with bitterness, but with a quiet remembrance of love and shared life. She spoke of the hardships they had endured together, the winters that had tested their endurance, and the lessons learned from living close to the land. Tom listened, captivated by the way she wove the story, not with drama, but with honesty and dignity. The middle woman then spoke of her own experiences. She had lost her husband to illness, a quiet but relentless enemy that had taken him from her too soon. She described the challenges of raising children alone, finding food, and maintaining the household in a harsh environment. Her voice carried both sorrow and strength, a reminder that life was full of both pain and resilience. Tom felt a deep respect for her ability to endure and continue moving forward, finding purpose and hope despite the losses she had faced. The youngest of the three women shared her story last. She spoke of her early years, the lessons her parents had taught her, and the skills she had acquired to survive in the desert. She told Tom about tracking animals, finding water in unexpected places, and the importance of observation and patience. Her words were practical, filled with wisdom that came from first-hand experience rather than books or instruction. Tom realized that these women had learned to read the land, to understand its rhythms, and to use that knowledge to sustain themselves and each other. As the stories continued, Tom felt a shift within himself. He had traveled for years, experiencing danger and adventure, yet he had rarely stopped to learn from others, especially those who had endured hardships silently and with dignity. The women's stories opened his eyes to a different kind of strength, one that was quiet but unyielding. He began to understand that survival was not just about skill with a gun or endurance on a trail, but about patience, observation, and respect for both the land and those who lived on it. Curiosity overcame him, and he asked the eldest woman how she had managed to maintain hope after such great loss. She looked at him, her eyes steady and thoughtful. "Hope," she said, "is not a thing that waits for you to find it. It is something you carry, something you create in the face of hardship. Each day we rise, each meal we prepare, each task we complete, it is hope in action. It is what keeps us alive." Tom nodded, feeling the weight of her words. He realized that he had often taken his own survival for granted, moving from one day to the next without understanding the quiet efforts and resilience that kept people like these women alive in the harshest conditions. The conversation then turned to practical lessons. The middle woman demonstrated how to find water in the desert soil, showing him subtle signs that he had never noticed before. The slight color of sand, the way certain plants grew, and the tracks of animals that led to hidden streams. She handed him a small, shallow bowl and showed him how to collect dew in the early morning, a technique that could sustain him on long journeys. Tom paid careful attention, practicing each step, feeling a sense of pride and accomplishment as he learned skills that could one day save his life. The youngest woman added her own lessons, teaching him how to recognize signs of approaching weather, the tracks of different desert animals, and how to move quietly without disturbing the fragile balance of the land. Each tip was simple, yet it revealed the depth of knowledge accumulated over years of careful observation. Tom realized that this education could not be found in towns or on cattle drives. It was born from experience, necessity, and respect for the environment. As the afternoon faded into evening, the sun's golden light began to give way to soft pinks and purples. The desert seemed to change with the light, casting long shadows and highlighting the contours of the dunes and rocky outcrops. Tom felt a deep sense of peace, a rare moment of stillness in a life that had always been on the move. He looked at the women, observing how their movements and interactions were natural, unhurried, and purposeful. There was a rhythm to their lives that he admired, a harmony between human effort and the environment that he had never experienced on the trail. The women then invited Tom to help prepare the evening meal. He carried water from the well, gathered firewood, and assisted in arranging the small cooking area. Each action was done with care, the attention to detail reflecting the lessons he had heard throughout the day. He realized that even the simplest tasks carried meaning and purpose, and that the women's lives were filled with a quiet dignity that came from making every effort count. As the fire crackled to life and the smell of cooking food filled the air, Tom felt a connection to this place and these people that he had not anticipated. He had come seeking shelter and respite, but he found wisdom, community, and a sense of belonging that went far beyond what he had imagined. The women's stories, lessons, and presence had opened a new perspective for him, showing that strength was not always loud or visible, but often quiet, persistent, and deeply human. After the meal, the eldest woman gestured for him to sit closer to the fire. "There is one more lesson tonight," she said. "It is not found in skill or strength, but in understanding." She handed him a small wooden cup filled with water and instructed him to listen to the sounds around him. Tom obeyed, sitting silently and closing his eyes. The desert at night was alive with subtle noises, the rustling of leaves, the distant call of a coyote, the whisper of wind across the sand. At first he noticed nothing unusual, but then, gradually, he began to perceive patterns, movements, and signs that had been invisible in the chaos of travel. "The desert speaks," the woman said softly. "If you listen, it tells you where water can be found, where danger approaches, and where life persists. Learn to hear it and it will guide you. Ignore it and it will punish you." Tom opened his eyes, seeing the desert in a new light. It was not just a barren expanse, but a living, breathing environment that demanded respect and attention. The night held lessons, patience, and wisdom if one was willing to observe carefully. As darkness deepened, the wind began to pick up, carrying fine grains of sand across the courtyard. Tom wrapped his coat tighter around him and watched the three women move gracefully, securing the adobe home for the night. Their actions were methodical and calm, revealing years of experience and preparation. He realized that their lives were a careful balance of observation, action, and anticipation, each movement a response to the environment that had shaped them. The youngest woman then demonstrated a small skill that Tom found fascinating: how to create a simple shelter using blankets and reeds in case of sudden changes in the desert weather. She worked patiently, explaining each step, and Tom followed carefully, practicing the technique. He understood that these lessons were not merely practical. They were a way of teaching resilience, foresight, and self-reliance. The skills he learned tonight could one day save his life, just as the wisdom and stories of the women had already changed the way he perceived the world. Around the fire, they shared quiet conversation, reflecting on the day's events. The middle woman spoke of her childhood, the travels she had undertaken, and the lessons learned from elders in her family. Tom listened, fascinated by the depth of experience and knowledge that had been accumulated over generations. Each story was a thread in a larger tapestry, a record of survival, adaptation, and human spirit. Tom felt a sense of humility and gratitude. He had entered this place seeking refuge, but he had gained far more: wisdom, understanding, and a perspective that would guide him for the rest of his journey. He realized that his life on the trail had been shaped by adventure and risk, but he had often overlooked the quiet strength found in observation, patience, and community. The women had taught him that life was not only about endurance, but also about connection, respect, and learning from those who had faced the desert for decades. As the night deepened, Tom prepared to rest near the fire, his mind full of new knowledge and reflections. The women moved about their tasks silently, ensuring that everything was secure and comfortable for the evening. The fire crackled softly, casting dancing shadows across the adobe walls, and the stars began to glitter brightly in the clear desert sky. Tom felt a sense of awe and wonder, realizing how vast and mysterious the world was, and how much he had yet to learn. He lay back on a blanket, listening to the subtle sounds of the night and the soft movements of the women as they completed their evening tasks. The desert seemed alive, a vast expanse of life, lessons, and quiet power. Tom understood that he was not merely a visitor in this place. He was a witness, a learner, and a traveler who had been offered insight into a world that few outsiders ever truly saw. The night stretched on, and Tom drifted into a light, peaceful sleep, carrying with him the stories, lessons, and quiet strength of the three women. The desert had revealed its wisdom, and he felt a profound connection to the land, the people, and the life that thrived in even the harshest conditions. This night would stay with him forever, shaping the way he traveled, observed, and understood the world around him. The first light of dawn barely touched the desert horizon when Tom awoke to a change in the air. The sky was no longer clear. Heavy clouds had rolled in overnight, dark and low, casting long shadows across the sand. The wind, usually gentle in the early morning, had begun to pick up, rustling through the sparse desert shrubs and carrying a fine grit of sand. Tom felt an uneasy chill run down his spine as he rose from the blanket near the fire. Shadow, his faithful horse, shifted nervously, stamping its hooves and flicking its ears at the wind. Tom knew that the desert could change in an instant, and the signs were unmistakable. A storm was coming. He stepped out into the courtyard where the three women were already awake, moving with purpose. Their faces, usually calm and composed, were set in quiet determination. Tom realized immediately that they had dealt with desert storms before, and they were taking the necessary steps to prepare. The eldest woman was securing the adobe roof, checking for loose tiles that could be blown away. The middle woman gathered firewood and stored it safely, while the youngest woman moved carefully around the perimeter, ensuring that nothing could be damaged or lost. Tom quickly joined them, offering help, though he felt a sense of humility. Despite his experience in the Wild West and familiarity with hardships, this was not a task he could undertake with confidence. He carried water to dampen the adobe walls, helping to prevent dust from being lifted into the air. He moved carefully, mindful of the sand blowing in his face, and followed the precise instructions of the women. Every gesture they made was deliberate, a product of years of experience and understanding of the desert's moods. As the morning progressed, the wind grew stronger. Clouds swirled in the sky, dark and threatening, and the temperature began to drop rapidly. Tom could feel the pressure in the air, a warning that the storm would arrive soon and with force. The women remained calm, their movements precise and coordinated, demonstrating a mastery over the unpredictable environment that Tom admired deeply. It was clear that survival in this land required respect, preparation, and constant vigilance. The eldest woman spoke softly but firmly. "The storm will come fast. We must protect the house and ourselves. There is little room for error." Her words carried weight, not fear, and Tom felt a sense of reassurance. He had often underestimated the desert, but here, in the presence of these resilient women, he saw the value of experience and foresight. Every task he performed, from securing supplies to reinforcing the adobe walls, was a lesson in practical survival. Soon, the wind became stronger, whipping sand into their faces and making the air nearly impossible to breathe. Tom wrapped his coat tightly around him and shielded his eyes, feeling the gritty particles sting his skin. Shadow whinnied nervously, and Tom had to calm him with gentle pats and reassuring words. The storm was coming faster than he expected, and he realized that this was a test not only of skill, but of patience, courage, and composure under pressure. The middle woman instructed him to help move small furniture and supplies into the safest part of the adobe home. Together, they lifted heavy containers of food and water, arranging them in a way that would protect them from the swirling sand. Tom marveled at their efficiency, the way each movement was calculated to maximize safety and minimize chaos. He understood that this was not the first storm they had faced, and their experience gave him confidence despite the rising tension. As the storm approached, the youngest woman taught Tom a simple but effective method to protect the entrance of the home. She showed him how to create a small barrier using sand and cloth, preventing the wind and debris from entering. Tom worked quickly, grateful for the instruction and impressed by the ingenuity of the solution. The storm's approach was visible now in the sky, a dark wall moving swiftly across the desert, carrying wind, sand, and a sense of impending chaos. When the storm finally struck, it hit with full force. Sand whipped through the air, stinging Tom's skin and making it difficult to see. The wind howled, rattling the adobe walls and shaking the small home. The women remained calm, their movements deliberate and practiced. Tom helped secure windows, doors, and supplies, following their guidance with as much precision as he could manage. He realized that panic would have been fatal. Only careful, measured action could carry them through. The fire outside had been extinguished by the wind, leaving them to rely on the small hearth inside the home for warmth. The women moved efficiently, reinforcing the adobe walls from the inside, while Tom assisted in any way he could. The storm raged on for hours, a relentless force that seemed to test both their endurance and their patience. Tom felt exhaustion creeping into his muscles, but he pushed it aside, understanding that vigilance was essential for survival. At one point, the wind lifted a loose piece of roof tile, threatening to fly across the courtyard. Tom lunged forward, catching it just in time, and felt a surge of relief and adrenaline. The women acknowledged his effort with a brief nod, and he understood that they valued not just action but awareness, timing, and careful observation. Each small success in protecting the home and themselves became a testament to resilience, teamwork, and respect for the forces around them. Hours passed, and the storm showed no sign of relenting. Tom observed the women closely, noting how they communicated silently through gestures and glances, moving in perfect harmony despite the chaos. It was a demonstration of experience, intuition, and unspoken understanding, a skill born of necessity and honed over years of living in the desert. Tom felt privileged to witness this, and even more fortunate to be included in the work, learning lessons he would never forget. The storm began to ease late in the afternoon, the wind gradually dying down and the sand settling back into the dunes. The sky, once dark and foreboding, began to clear, revealing streaks of sunlight breaking through the clouds. The women moved about the courtyard, checking the walls, the doors, and the supplies. Tom followed, assisting where he could, his respect and admiration for their skill and resilience growing with every task. Finally, as the last gusts of wind faded and the desert returned to its usual quiet, the women allowed themselves a brief moment of rest. Tom sat near the hearth, his clothes dusted with sand and his muscles sore, reflecting on the intensity of the storm and the lessons he had learned. He realized that the experience had been transformative, not only teaching him practical skills but also instilling a deeper respect for the desert and for those who had mastered its challenges. The eldest woman spoke then, her voice calm and steady. "You have done well," she said, acknowledging his efforts. "The desert tests all who enter, but those who listen, observe, and act with care survive. Remember this lesson, Thomas. It will serve you well on your journey." Tom nodded, feeling a sense of pride and gratitude. He understood that survival was not merely about strength or courage, but about patience, observation, and humility in the face of forces beyond one's control. As the evening approached, the three women prepared a simple meal by the small hearth. Tom helped in minor ways, carrying water and arranging firewood, but he also observed, learning from every movement and gesture. The food, simple yet nourishing, provided not just sustenance but a sense of comfort and connection. They spoke quietly of the storm, recounting the subtle signs that had indicated its arrival and the techniques used to endure it. Tom absorbed every word, realizing that knowledge, preparation, and respect for the environment were just as important as courage and skill. After the meal, the eldest woman invited Tom to sit closer to the fire. She handed him a small cup of water and gestured toward the desert beyond the adobe walls. "Look carefully," she said. "The desert teaches those who watch. Observe the changes, listen to the winds, and you will learn more than any guidebook can tell you." Tom looked out across the sand, noticing details he had previously overlooked, the way the clouds moved, the patterns of sand left by the wind, and the subtle tracks of animals that had adapted to the storm. For the first time, he felt a profound connection to the land, understanding it not just as a challenge to survive, but as a living, breathing environment with lessons to offer. The night settled in, calm after the storm, and Tom felt a sense of awe at the resilience of the women and the power of the desert. They had faced the storm with patience, skill, and quiet courage, and he had learned that survival was as much about observation and respect as it was about action. He realized that his time at the adobe home had already changed him, teaching him lessons that would guide him for the rest of his journey through the Wild West. As he lay near the fire, preparing to rest, Tom reflected on the events of the day. The storm had been fierce and unpredictable, yet the women's calm, methodical response had ensured their safety and survival. He understood that life in the desert demanded vigilance, preparation, and a deep understanding of the environment. He also recognized the importance of human connection, of learning from those who had lived and endured long before he arrived. The night grew colder, and Tom wrapped himself in the hand-woven blanket given to him by the eldest woman. The fire crackled softly, casting flickering shadows across the adobe walls, and the desert stretched endlessly beyond, quiet and still. He felt a sense of peace, knowing that he had survived the storm not alone, but with guidance, instruction, and companionship. The lessons of the day, learned through action and observation, would remain with him forever, shaping the way he approached the desert and the life of a wandering cowboy. In the stillness of the night, Tom drifted into a restful sleep, the memory of the storm, the wisdom of the women, and the resilience of the desert echoing in his mind. He knew that the journey ahead would be long and challenging, but he also understood that he had gained knowledge, strength, and insight that would serve him well. The adobe home, the women, and the lessons of the desert would stay with him, guiding his path and reminding him of the quiet power of patience, preparation, and human endurance. The sun rose slowly over the desert horizon, casting soft golden light across the dunes and illuminating the adobe home where Tom had spent the past days. The storm had passed, leaving the world fresh and quiet, the air crisp and clean. Tom awoke to the gentle warmth of the morning, feeling the weight of the past few days settle in his body and mind. He had survived the desert, learned from its trials, and formed a connection with three remarkable women whose wisdom and resilience had profoundly changed him. Shadow nickered softly from outside, stretching his legs and flicking his ears at the rising sun. Tom smiled, patting the horse's neck. He could see the women moving about the courtyard, tending to the small garden, gathering firewood, and preparing for the day. Their movements were calm and purposeful, a reflection of lives lived in harmony with the desert and its rhythms. Tom realized that he had grown attached to this place, to the quiet strength and wisdom embodied in each of the women. After a simple breakfast of bread, dried fruit, and fresh water, the eldest woman approached Tom. She handed him a small, carefully wrapped bundle. "For your journey," she said softly. Tom opened it to find a piece of cured meat, a hand-woven blanket, and a small flask of water. It was practical, yes, but it carried something more, a symbol of trust, care, and the bond they had formed over the past days. He felt a wave of gratitude, realizing that the generosity extended to him was both practical and deeply human. The middle woman stepped forward next, placing a hand gently on Tom's shoulder. "Remember what you have learned here," she said. "The desert will test you again, but you now know how to listen, observe, and endure. Carry these lessons with you, and they will guide you safely." Her eyes were steady, yet there was a warmth there that made Tom feel seen, understood, and respected. He nodded, the words resonating deeply within him. The youngest woman joined them, offering a small woven pouch of herbs and dried plants. "For strength and health," she said. "They are simple, but they will remind you of this place and the lessons you have learned." Tom took the pouch carefully, sensing the thoughtfulness behind it. These small gifts were more than items. They were reminders of resilience, care, and the connection between humans and the land they inhabit. Tom knew that it was time to leave. The trail ahead was uncertain, the desert vast and unpredictable. Yet he felt a renewed sense of purpose, confidence, and respect for the environment and for the people he might encounter. He saddled Shadow, making sure the horse was fed, rested, and ready for the journey. The women watched silently, their expressions calm yet full of understanding. Tom sensed that words were not necessary. The bond they had formed transcended speech, rooted in shared experience and mutual respect. Before mounting, Tom turned to face them fully. "I cannot thank you enough," he said sincerely. "You have given me shelter, wisdom, and strength. I will never forget what I have learned here." The eldest woman nodded, a quiet smile touching her lips. "Travel carefully, Thomas. Respect the land, respect its people, and it will carry you safely." Tom swung into the saddle, feeling Shadow shift beneath him as they prepared to move forward. The desert stretched endlessly ahead, a mixture of golden sand, jagged rocks, and distant mountains bathed in morning light. The air was filled with a sense of possibility, adventure, and quiet reflection. Tom realized that this journey was no longer just about finding a trail or reaching a destination. It was about carrying the lessons of patience, resilience, and observation into every step he took. As they rode, the wind whispered softly through the desert, a gentle reminder of the storm that had passed and the lessons it had taught. Tom thought back on the night at the adobe home, the stories shared by the three women, and the practical skills they had imparted. He recalled the calm and careful movements during the storm, the way they had worked together to protect their home and each other, and the quiet strength that had carried them through. These memories were vivid, guiding him like a compass through the vast, open landscape. Tom reflected on the personal growth he had experienced. He had arrived at the adobe home weary, uncertain, and somewhat lost, both physically and emotionally. Over the past days, he had witnessed resilience, kindness, and wisdom that had reshaped his perspective. The desert, once a symbol of isolation and danger, had become a teacher, revealing lessons about observation, patience, and the value of human connection. He realized that every challenge he faced in the past, the long rides, the harsh weather, the loneliness, had prepared him to fully appreciate the depth of these lessons. As the miles passed beneath Shadow's steady hooves, Tom noticed subtle details in the desert that he had previously overlooked. The way certain plants pointed toward hidden water sources, the tracks of animals that hinted at safe paths or potential dangers, and the shifting colors of the sand that indicated wind patterns and weather changes. He understood now that the desert was not just an empty expanse. It was a living, breathing environment that communicated with those who were willing to observe carefully. Throughout the journey, Tom carried the memory of the three women in his mind. Their faces, voices, and gestures had become anchors, reminders of human resilience and care. He thought of the eldest woman's wisdom, the middle woman's experience, and the youngest woman's practical skills. Each had contributed to his understanding in different ways, and he realized that the lessons he had learned were not merely survival techniques. They were principles for living with awareness, respect, and compassion. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Tom felt a sense of gratitude and humility. He had experienced moments of fear and uncertainty, yet he had emerged stronger, wiser, and more connected to the world around him. The desert had tested him, as it tested all who traveled its vast expanse, but he had been guided, protected, and taught by those who understood it best. The experience had deepened his appreciation for the land, its rhythms, and the people who called it home. Tom paused occasionally to let Shadow rest, giving the horse water and shade whenever possible. During these moments, he reflected on the journey so far and the path ahead. He realized that life, much like the desert, was filled with unpredictable challenges and moments of unexpected beauty. Survival required skill and awareness, but true growth came from learning, observing, and forming connections with others along the way. The adobe home and the three women had become a symbol of that truth, a beacon of guidance and inspiration that he would carry with him forever. By mid-afternoon, the landscape began to change. The desert gave way to rocky outcrops and scattered shrubs, a sign that the terrain was shifting and new challenges might appear. Tom adjusted his course carefully, using the skills he had learned to navigate safely. He checked for subtle signs of water, noted animal tracks, and observed the patterns of the wind. Each step was measured, informed by the lessons of the past days, and he felt a growing confidence in his ability to move safely and purposefully through the land. As the day wore on, Tom's thoughts returned frequently to the stories shared by the women. He remembered the tales of loss, endurance, and quiet triumph that had been told around the fire. He reflected on the strength it took to survive in such a harsh environment, and he understood that the true measure of resilience was not merely survival, but the ability to maintain hope, dignity, and connection despite adversity. These lessons, he realized, would guide him not only through the desert but through life itself. Evening approached, painting the sky with soft oranges, purples, and reds. The desert seemed to glow with a gentle warmth, and the shadows lengthened across the dunes. Tom felt a sense of closure and completion, knowing that this chapter of his journey had come to an end. The adobe home faded in the distance, a small dot on the horizon, but its presence lingered in his mind and heart. The women, their wisdom, and the lessons they had imparted would remain with him, shaping the way he approached every future challenge. As night fell, Tom found a quiet spot to rest Shadow and prepare for sleep. The stars emerged one by one, sparkling against the dark velvet sky, and the desert became a place of calm and reflection. He thought about the journey ahead, the trails yet to be traveled, and the people he might meet. Yet he no longer felt lost or alone. He carried the knowledge, strength, and guidance of those he had encountered, and he understood that he was part of a larger story, connected to the land and the people who had shaped it. Before drifting into sleep, Tom took a moment to reflect on the lessons he had learned. He thought of patience in the face of danger, observation as a tool for understanding, and the value of human connection and kindness. He realized that these were not abstract concepts, but practical living principles that had been demonstrated through action and experience. The adobe home, the three women, and the desert itself had taught him that life's challenges could be met with courage, respect, and wisdom. As he lay under the open sky, Tom felt a profound sense of gratitude. He had entered the desert weary, uncertain, and searching for a path, but he had found more than direction. He had found understanding, resilience, and human connection. The lessons of the past days would guide him for the rest of his journey, not only in the desert but in life beyond it. He knew that the adobe home and the three women would remain in his memory as symbols of strength, wisdom, and the enduring power of human kindness. In the quiet of the night, the desert stretched endlessly, yet Tom no longer felt small or insignificant. He felt part of a larger world, connected to the land, its rhythms, and the people who inhabited it. The stars above, the cool breeze, and the gentle sounds of the desert became a lullaby, carrying him into a restful sleep, filled with dreams of the journey ahead and the lessons that would continue to guide him. When dawn came again, Tom would ride forward, carrying not only supplies and survival skills but the intangible gifts of wisdom, resilience, and human connection. The adobe home would remain behind him, but its impact would echo in every decision, every observation, and every step he took along the endless trails of the Wild West. He had left as a lost traveler, but he would continue as a man transformed, aware, grateful, and ready to face whatever the desert and life itself might bring.